How to properly sync your mashups. First, let's go over what I mean by syncing. Syncing can be boiled down to lining up your vocals and Geometry Dash song. However, because this is strictly a Geometry Dash mashup tutorial series, when it comes to syncing, you want to leave the GD song unchanged. Syncing adjustments should only be applied to vocals. The main three things that fall under the category of syncing are making mashups on sync, on beat, and on bar. If your mashup is off sync, that means your vocals are misaligned from the GD song by less than 1 beat. A beat is the unit of measurement I will be using to differentiate each category from one another. 1 beat is just 1 tick of a metronome. If your mashup is off sync, it's misaligned between 2 beats. I will now be showing some examples of off sync mashups. It can be very noticeable, or more subtle.
Did you forget that I've got a thing called emotion? You live and you let till you start to bleed.
In order to fix off sync, you first need to identify if your vocals are too late or too early. If your mashup was rejected by a Songfile Hub staff member and you can't figure out if it's too late or early yourself, you can always ping the staff member and ask. If your vocals are too early, move them forward. If they're too late, move them backward. If you're having trouble with making your mashup on sync, I've heard that a metronome can help a lot. I myself haven't used a metronome when making my mashups on sync before, but it makes sense that one would help. In example 1, the vocals were too late, and in example 2, the vocals were too early. Now come the fixed version of both examples.
Did you forget that I've got a thing called emotion? You live and you let till you start to bleed.
A common mistake is mistaking off BPM and off sync. Off BPM is when your vocals aren't stretched to the same BPM as the instrumental, making the vocals sound like they're slowly lagging behind or going ahead of the instrumental. Off BPM is a totally different issue from off sync and needs to be fixed before you can properly sync your mashups. In order to distinguish off BPM and off sync, listen to the vocals. Does it sound like they're slowly lagging behind or going ahead of the instrumental? Sometimes the vocals even sound like they're going back and forth, sounding on sync and off sync. Here's an example of an off BPM mashup. In the grand scheme of things, that was a pretty extreme example. Know that off BPM can be very subtle. The only way of fixing off BPM is ensuring that you have both the instrumental BPM correct and the vocal BPM correct. If either is even a little bit off, it can ruin your entire mashup. Offbeat is when the vocals are misaligned by an entire beat. Offbeat can be unnoticeable to the untrained ear. However, it gets more and more noticeable the more and more experience you get with mashups. I'm gonna start off by showing an example of offbeat.
I am equivalent to a ramen 20 tons of pure dope, my jams. Have your ramen ticket revoked, I can. In front of a really stubborn killer goat like stand.
I've intentionally picked a song most of you probably don't have too much experience listening to. That is because offbeat is more noticeable when it's with a song you're familiar with. The easiest way to both check if your mashup is offbeat and fix offbeat is to listen to the original song the vocals come from.
I am equivalent to a whopping 20 tons of pure dope, my jams.
The way I figure out if my mashup is offbeat is by listening to that first beat. By listening to that first beat, we can figure out that the example was one whole beat too early. We can then move it a beat later and fix it.
I am equivalent to a whopping 20 tons of pure dope, my jams. Have your ramen ticket revoked, I can. In front of a really stubborn killer goat like stand.
Offbar is very similar to offbeat. Offbar is when your vocals are misaligned by an entire bar. An entire bar is usually 4 beats. So, if your mashup is misaligned by 1 to 3 beats, it's offbeat. 4, it's offbar. Offbar most often happens when either your vocals or instrumental have a missing or extra bar. Extra bars are somewhat common and you need to learn to recognize them. Here's an example of a mashup being offbar due to misalignment. Yes, I can. Doubt, better leave. I'm running with this plan. Pull me, grab me, grab in the bucket.
ain't happy.
This first example is the most similar to Offbeat and the most noticeable. It can be fixed the exact same way as Offbeat. Now, a mashup that goes off bar due to an extra bar in the instrumental.
I can't find your silver lining. I don't mean to judge, but when you read your speech, it's tiring. Enough is enough. I'm covering my ears like a kid. Will your words mean nothing? I go la la la.
Here I've emulated probably the most common mistake when it comes to extra bars. What I've done is to align the chorus of the vocals to be on beat with the drop of the instrumental. However, there's an extra bar before the drop of the instrumental, making the pre-drop off bar. This mistake also happens if there are extra bars after choruses. People tend to align mashups to be on beat at the chorus. In order to fix this, you identify the extra bar, which is right before the chorus in this case, make a cut in the vocals, and move accordingly.
I can't find your silver lining. I don't mean to judge, but when you read your speech, it's tiring. Enough is enough. I'm covering my ears like a kid. Will your words mean nothing? I go la la la.
And next is an example of a song having a missing bar, making the mashup off bar.
My heart got used to breaking. I should thank you, baby. Found what I've been chasing. Found the one I've waited for. I'm coming home tonight.
Just like with the last example, because I've carelessly synced the vocals up to the drop and not paid attention to any potential extra or missing bars, the pre-drop ends up off bar. But because the GD song is actually missing a bar here, I need to remove a bar from the vocals. This requires careful experimentation to figure out what sounds good.
My heart got used to breaking. I should thank you, baby. Found the one I've waited for. I'm coming home tonight.
It also matters if an acapella has an extra bar or missing bar. For example, if your acapella has an extra bar, you would need to remove that extra bar from the acapella. And if it has a missing bar, you would need to artificially add a new bar or just make a long pause in the acapella where the missing bar is. Songs can also have missing beats and extra beats, where you would need to do the same stuff I did here for bars, but for beats. And that's the end of yet another tutorial. I'm still really happy with how these are turning out. And if you have any questions or with something I left out, then feel free to ask in the comments, and I'm going to answer as many questions as possible. I was going to talk way more in this video, like I was going to have a whole spiel about time signatures, but I felt like that was just unnecessary. But yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Like and subscribe for more tutorials or mashups, and see you next time.